So I've got sort of two projects cooking, which is essentially taking Commerce Hero and spinning it up in a different industry. So like a talent marketplace. So I'm having fun with that as I'm working on the homepage and I'm thinking through like, okay, how am I communicating what's important about this service? And I'm thinking like, for example, Commerce Hero does a lot of things, right? And I've pivoted different directions. I've emphasized certain pieces of functionality and then, I'm like, oh, well, that's not so important to the core business model, whatnot. So it's always easier to start fresh. There's a real clear focus on full-time hires and stuff like that. And like, I'm thinking about all the questions I get asked repeatedly. Literally, like this is like horrible, but people ask about pricing all the time and pricing is not on the homepage. Not because I want to hide the pricing. A lot of recruiters, you have to call to ask about the pricing. And I actually don't want to do that. And the pricing is in the public facing documentation, which is what I link people to. But I literally have not updated the homepage because I'm like, oh, I got to get in there. I got to design it. I got to da 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 da. Now I'm in Webflow and I'm just like, I look through their library of different section styles and they all have all sorts of cool options. And I pick one, boom, put it in, write it up. And it's like, it's just beautiful. It's really wild to work at that level of abstraction where I'm not thinking about layout, CSS issues. I'm just, using these really nice building blocks to put something together and things like button titles. We know from A/B tests that the text that you put on buttons is important. Like I know that, but I never get around, for example, the call to action button will say like get started, right? And I'm like, well, I should probably put something more specific. But then, just the friction of working in code, it's definitely a superpower. The fact that I can work in code, the fact that I can build a business, do the marketing, all that is great. But when you're working at that level, there is a level of friction that makes you just move slowly. Being able to work at a higher level of abstraction is great. I was like, the button said get started. And then I was thinking about another one of the key areas of confusion is when you have a talent marketplace, you got to target both sides of the market uniquely. So the clients and the candidates, right? And that's something I've mixed together in some confusing ways with Commerce Hero and something I've also wanted to clean up, but it's like, oh gosh, how do I do that? And so the simple tweak of like so the homepage is mostly targeted clients, but then there's a link that says, are you a candidate or are you a developer? So that'll take them to that developer facing page. And then the call to action, instead of saying get started, I was like, well, that might be confusing if it says get started because the developer might think that's for them, whereas that get started button is for the client. So I changed from get started to start hiring. I know that button titles like that are specific and clear make a huge difference, but there's so much friction when you're working in the code that you just sort of don't end up making those changes. And like working in Webflow is just incredible. So having a lot of fun with that. Also, the idea of spinning up other marketplaces is really interesting. It's something I've thought about, I've talked to people about in the past, but then ultimately I've been like, oh God, it's going to be so complicated to figure out how to reuse the code base, how to figure out a business model behind it. But the cool thing is that like, if I can get this to work in a no code workflow, which I think I can, all of those worries about repurposing the code base and things like that are sort of gone. And so then it simplifies the other side of things, which is how can I figure out the business model of quote franchising or whatever it ends up being, technically profit share, whatever. It's like, okay, now that I don't have to worry about that, I can figure this out. So I don't know how far it's going to go, but it's cool. I like the idea of working with a couple of good friends. It's one thing to say, okay, let's spin something up. I'm going to have to spend 40 hours coding this. Like that's just such a drain. Like I don't know when I'd find that time versus like, I'll spend an hour to throw up a beautiful homepage that you're going to love.